The Icy Heiress showed up drunk at my door at 2 in the morning, and when I opened it, she whispered my name like she'd been practicing it in her sleep for months. Not Miss Voss. Not the accountant from the basement. Wren, soft, cracked open, said the way you say a word you're afraid will disappear if you say it wrong. 3 hours earlier, I hadn't known her mouth would ever shape that word at all. My name is Wren Voss. I am 27 years old, an Omega, and on the morning everything changed, I was standing in a windowless sub-basement office at Thorn Maritime, and holdings being told, in front of 11 coworkers, that I had cost the company $400,000. I hadn't. I would learn exactly how I hadn't in time, down to the cent. But that morning, I only knew that Desmond Castellan, Chief Financial Officer, silver-templed and smiling the way men smile when they've already decided you're finished, was holding a printout with my badge number stamped on the corner and calling it evidence. Discrepancies in the Holloway shipment ledger, he said, tapping the page twice, like a judge striking a gavel. Traced to Terminal 402. That's your terminal, isn't it, Miss Voss? It was. It was also the terminal 3 other people used on the swing shift, a detail nobody in that room seemed interested in. I opened my mouth to say so. Nothing came out smooth. It never did. Under pressure, my voice had a habit of thinning to almost nothing exactly when I needed it loudest, a family joke gone sour a long time ago. Someone near the coffee station murmured typical, low enough to pretend it was private, loud enough to make sure I heard. She probably didn't even mean to, said Priya from receivables, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. You know how the quiet ones are. Half the time you can't even scent them coming. Silent Omega. That was the phrase, the one that had followed me since I was 19 years old and sat in a clinic office while a doctor in a soft voice explained that my scent glands had never fully bloomed, that I would likely never trigger the kind of recognition surge that made alphas stop in hallways, that I should consider it neither tragedy nor shame, only a fact to plan a life around. My ex-fiancé, Callum Reyes, had considered it a tragedy anyway. I need someone the world can smell coming, he'd told me, 3 weeks before our wedding, folding his jacket over his arm like the apology was already packed. You're lovely, Wren. You're just quiet. I need loud. I had spent 8 years since then learning to be so competent that no one had time to notice how quiet I was. I balanced ledgers other auditors gave up on. I found the decimal point that sank a shipping contract before it sank the company. None of it mattered in a room where a man with a printout had already decided my ending. You have until Friday, Desmond said, to explain the discrepancy, or I'll have no choice but to escalate to Miss Thorn directly. He said her name like a threat. Everyone flinched like it was one. Larkin Thorn owned this building, and 40 others like it, a shipping and logistics empire her family had built over 3 generations, and she was, by every account I'd ever heard, the coldest woman in the city, a woman who had fired a division head by text message, who had walked out of her own mother's memorial reception after 11 minutes because grief, she'd reportedly said, was not a schedule item. The Icy Heiress. I had worked in her building for 4 years and never once been in a room with her. I left that night with my badge still clipped to my collar and my hands not quite steady, rode the bus home in the kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as a cues, and let myself into my apartment above a shuttered laundromat where the radiator knocked twice before it caught and the mug I made my tea in. Chipped enamel, Robin's egg blue, my mother's. Handle re-glued so many times it wore a faint white scar, sat waiting on the counter like it always did. I did not expect anyone. I never expected anyone. At 2 in the morning, someone knocked. I opened the door, already rehearsing the sentence I'd give a stranger at the wrong apartment, and found Larkin Thorn instead, soaked through a coat that cost more than my rent. Mascara ghosted under one eye, swaying very slightly on my welcome mat like the building itself had tilted. Up close her scent hit me before her face did, black fur and struck flint, cold and sharp, and underneath it, something scorched, like a fire that had gone out too fast. She looked at me the way you look at a lit window after a long time walking in the dark. "Ren," she said. Just that. My name in her mouth for the first time, and she said it like she'd been saying it for months in rooms I wasn't in. I stood there registering 3 facts at once: that the coldest woman in the city knew my name, that she was drunk enough to be dangerous to herself on a night this cold, and that some part of me, some old caretaking instinct I'd built a whole childhood around and never fully retired, was already stepping back from the door to let her in before my brain had finished deciding whether that was wise. "You're bleeding," I said, because her knuckles were, thin scrapes across 2 of them. And because it was easier to say than "How do you know my name?" "Am I?" She looked at her hand like it belonged to someone else. That would explain the coat. "Come inside, before you fall down." "I don't fall down." She said it like a doctrine recited from memory, the kind of sentence somebody else had taught her a long time ago, and she'd never gotten around to questioning. Then her knees buckled anyway, and I caught her. She was taller than me and heavier than she looked, all coiled muscle gone loose, and walked her through my door with one arm braced under hers while my mind ran in useless circles. "This is not possible. This is happening. Don't drop her. Don't let her see you shaking." I did not know. Standing in my own doorway with the Icy Heiress bleeding gently onto my sleeve, that I was about to learn exactly how long she had already known me. I got her onto my couch, which she filled the way expensive things fill cheap rooms, and went to the kitchen for the first aid kit I kept under the sink from years of a father whose hands never quite steadied either. My mother's mug came off the shelf without me deciding it, chamomile, the last of it, sugar stirred in because drunk people needed sugar more than they needed lectures. When I came back, Larkin was watching my apartment with an expression I couldn't read, cataloging it the way you'd catalog a museum you'd already visited in a dream. "You kept the plant," she said. I stopped in the doorway. "What plant?" She frowned, like the sentence had gotten away from her. "Nothing, forget it. I hadn't told anyone about my mother's fern. Dead 2 winters now, its pot still on the sill, because throwing it out had felt like one more small death I wasn't ready to sign off on." I set the mug down in front of her instead of asking. Some questions you save for daylight, when the person answering them can be held responsible for the answer. "Drink this," I said. "Slowly, and tell me if you're going to be sick, because I only have the 1 bathroom, and I'd like a warning." Something that wasn't quite a laugh moved through her, more breath than sound. "Efficient," she said. "They told me you'd be efficient. Who's they?" She looked at me over the rim of the mug, fur and flint gone soft at the edges now, warming the way a scent does when the person wearing it stops holding their breath. "That's a conversation for when I'm not 4 drinks past sensible," she said. "Ask me again when I can lie to you properly." "I don't want you to lie to me. I want to know how you know my name." "I've known your name for a year," she said it simply, the way you'd state a fact about the weather, and then seemed startled that it had left her mouth at all. Her hand came up like she could pull the sentence back out of the air. "I shouldn't have said that." "You shouldn't have said a lot of things tonight," I said, "but here we are." She was quiet a moment, the kind of look that made me feel catalogued twice over, and something in her shoulders came down 1/2 an inch, like a door easing off a lock it had been holding shut out of habit rather than necessity. "You can fall apart here," I told her, because it was what I would have wanted said to me. Once. and no one had said it. "I've got steady hands. I've had practice, she repeated. "With what?" "A father who drank the way you're drinking tonight. Every night, for a while. I know how to sit next to it without making it worse." I didn't know why I told her that. It wasn't a story I gave out for free. But her scent had gone raw and unguarded in a way that made honesty feel like the only currency the room would accept. She was quiet long enough that I thought she'd drifted off. Then, my father called me tonight to remind me I need an heir before I'm 34. He had the conversation with my mother's ashes on the mantel behind him while he said it. He does that. Talks past her like she's furniture that used to argue back. Her jaw tightened. "Need is a leash," he told me once, when I was 9, after I cried because a dog died. Cut it before it cuts you. I have spent 25 years cutting it. I am extremely good at cutting it. "You don't sound like someone who's good at it," I said. "You sound like someone standing in a stranger's apartment at 2 in the morning. Her eyes came up to mine, and for one unguarded second, there was nothing icy in them at all. Only something raw and searching and impossibly tired. "You're not a stranger," she said. "That's rather the trouble." I wanted to ask what she meant. I wanted to ask about the year, about the plant, about a wallet I hadn't yet remembered was relevant. But her eyes were already sliding shut, her breathing lengthening into something almost peaceful. One hand curled loosely around my mother's mug, like she meant to keep it. I sat on the floor beside the couch and watched the coldest woman in the city sleep in my apartment, her scent slowly filling the small room, black fur and struck flint gone warm as embers, and understood that something in my life had just come permanently, irreversibly loose. At 6, a car idled outside, and a broad-shouldered man in a dark coat knocked twice, quiet and precise. I opened the door to find him studying me with the flat assessment of a man cataloging threats for a living. "Griggs," he said, by way of introduction, nodding past me at Larkin, who was stirring on the couch with the particular wince of someone rediscovering consequences. Head of her security detail. "I've had this address for 4 years and never once used it." He said it like an accusation and an apology both. "In 15 years, Miss Thorn has never stayed anywhere until dawn. Not once." "She's not staying," Larkin said, sitting up too fast, the mask sliding back over her face in real time, chin lifting, spine straightening, every soft edge from the night before folding itself away like a coat put back on a hanger. She looked, for one disorienting second, like a different woman entirely. "I was leaving." "Of course," I said, and did not know why it stung. At the door she paused, hand on the frame, and for a moment the mask slipped a half-inch. "Thank you," she said, quiet, almost formal, "for not asking me to explain myself at 2 in the morning. You can explain yourself at a decent hour," I said. "I'll be here." Something in her expression flickered, surprise, maybe, that I'd offered a next time instead of demanding one. She reached into her coat and pressed a heavy card into my hand, black with silver lettering, an address and a time. "Thorn Tower, 9 o'clock. Don't be late." Then she was gone, down the stairs, into the car, into the version of herself that fired division heads by text and walked out of memorials in 11 minutes. I stood in my doorway a long time, the card warm from her hand, my mother's empty mug still on the coffee table, and understood I had no idea what I had just agreed to. Thorn Tower did not look like a building so much as an argument for wealth, 60 floors of glass holding the morning light like it had been commissioned specially. I had worked 4 years in this company's basement and never once used the front entrance. The security guard checked my card twice before he believed the elevator I wanted was the executive one. It climbed through 30 floors of glass and money while my reflection tried to look like it belonged. It didn't. Neither did I. The office I was led to on the 58th floor was not the audit pool. It was a corner suite with a view that made my stomach drop for reasons that had nothing to do with height, and on the desk sat a cup of chamomile tea, steeped exactly right, sugar already stirred in, beside a plate of the specific lemon shortbread my mother used to make before her hands got too unsteady for baking. I hadn't mentioned either of those things to anyone at this company, ever. "You'll be reviewing the Holloway account discrepancy," said a woman I didn't recognize, crisp and efficient, setting a tablet in front of me. "Directly, Miss Thorn's request." "Miss Voss." Desmond's voice arrived before I'd finished sitting down, and he filled the doorway with the particular smugness of a man who thought he already knew how this story ended. "Interesting promotion. I do wonder what you did to earn it." His eyes went to the tea, to the shortbread, and something calculating moved behind them. "Or who you did it for." "I earned 4 years of unglamorous overtime nobody thanked me for," I said, keeping my voice level, though my pulse wasn't. "If you have a real question, ask it." He smiled, unbothered, the smile of a man who had learned a long time ago that Omega's apologizing for existing was the natural order of things, and had never once had that order challenged. "We'll see how long the shine lasts," he said, and left. Griggs appeared not long after, refilling nothing, checking nothing, simply present in the doorway the way furniture is present. "Careful what you find in those numbers, Miss Voss," he said, low, not unkind. "Some ledgers are load-bearing walls. Pull the wrong figure and the whole structure comes down on somebody's head." "Whose head?" He didn't answer. He only looked, for one unguarded second, toward the closed door of the office next to mine, where I could hear, faintly, Larkin's voice on a call, sharp and controlled, every trace of the woman who'd slept on my couch folded away somewhere I couldn't see. I opened the tablet, and the numbers, at least, told the truth even when people didn't. It took 4 days of nights I should have spent sleeping to see the pattern whole, not one discrepancy, but 9, threaded across 3 years, each one small enough to survive an ordinary audit, and each one bleeding toward the same shell account through a chain of shipping manifests nobody but a forensic auditor with too much time and too little trust would ever bother cross-referencing. On the 5th morning, in a boardroom with 11 executives and one very still, very sharp-eyed heiress at its head, I laid the trail out on the screen, line by line, timestamp by timestamp, until the room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when they realize they are watching someone be right in real time. "Terminal 402 logged the anomaly," I said, "because Terminal 402 is where the discrepancy was designed to surface. It wasn't a mistake. It was a door left open on purpose, and someone made sure my badge number was standing next to it when the alarm went off." I looked, once, at Desmond, whose smile had gone very still. "The real transfers route through a vendor account registered 18 months ago. Signatory approval requires Level 9 clearance." I let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to. "There are 4 people in this building with Level 9 clearance. I am not one of them. Nobody in that room breathed for a full 3 seconds. Larkin's eyes hadn't left me once." "Thank you, Miss Voss," she said, and her voice in front of 11 people was steady as a held note. "That will be all for today." She found me an hour later on the observation floor, both of us looking out at a city that seemed smaller from here than it had any right to. Her scent reached me before she spoke, fur and flint, warmer at the edges than boardroom cold, and something in my chest tightened the way it had on my couch 3 nights before. "You want to know how I knew your name?" she said, without preamble. "I've wanted to know since 2 in the morning." She was quiet a moment, hands folded behind her back, the posture of someone deciding whether a door was worth opening. "A year ago, I dropped my wallet on the stairwell of a parking garage after a gala. I'd had 4 drinks too many to survive gracefully. $4,000 in cash, all my cards. Someone found it and mailed it back through interoffice courier the next morning, every dollar still inside. No note, no name. Something cold moved through me, not her scent, my own understanding, arriving late and heavy. That was me. I know." She turned to face me fully now. I traced the courier log. "It took my security team 11 minutes to find your badge number. It took me considerably longer to work out what to do with that information, because the honest answer was nothing. You hadn't done anything but be decent in a city that doesn't reward it, and I told myself that was the end of it." Her jaw worked once. "Then I rode the elevator with you 3 weeks later, for 11 floors, and your scent did something to me I did not have a category for. Chamomile, brown sugar. I have not stopped thinking about it since. You've been watching me." "For a year." "I paid your mother's hospital balance 18 months ago," she said, "and it landed like a struck bell, logged as a clerical billing adjustment so you'd never trace it to me." I told myself it was because you didn't deserve to lose her over a spreadsheet error the hospital refused to fix. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. Her voice, for the first time since I'd met her sober, wavered. "The whole truth is that I have built my entire life around never needing anyone, and somehow I have spent a year needing to know that you were safe, fed, and unbroken, without ever once having the courage to walk up and say so to your face. I didn't know whether to be furious or undone. Both arrived at once, tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate the threads." "You could have just talked to me," I said, and my voice, infuriatingly, cracked on the last word. "Instead of turning my life into something you managed from a distance, like one of your shipping accounts." "I know." She didn't defend it. That, more than anything, was what disarmed me. "I am telling you now because Desmond Castellan is about to make this considerably more dangerous for you, and you deserve to walk into that danger knowing exactly who is standing beside you and why." Behind us, down 58 floors, the trail I'd laid on that screen was already moving through the building like smoke through vents, and somewhere in it, a man with a great deal to lose had just started deciding how far he'd go to keep losing it quietly. Desmond moved on a Tuesday, which felt, in hindsight, like the kind of detail I'd remember for the rest of my life, the ordinariness of it, the fact that ruin so often arrives on a day with nothing else scheduled. Security found doctored transfer approvals in my desk drawer at 9 in the morning, my badge number forged onto 3 of them with a competence that would have been almost admirable if it hadn't been aimed at me. By 9:20, I was being walked out of the building I'd worked in for 4 years by 2 guards who wouldn't meet my eyes, past a lobby full of people who'd apparently already heard the story Desmond wanted told, that the quiet accounting clerk from the basement had been embezzling for months, and that her sudden promotion to Miss Thorn's floor was, as one voice in the crowd murmured just loud enough, exactly what you'd expect from that kind of omega, angling for a rich alpha's sympathy. I made it 3 blocks before my legs stopped agreeing to carry me, and I sat down hard on a bus bench, shaking my badge, revoked, useless, still clenched in one fist like proof of a life that had just been taken back. Larkin's car found me 9 minutes later. I know because I counted them, the way I counted everything when the rest of me had nothing steady to hold on to. "Get in," she said, and there was nothing icy in her voice at all now, only a controlled fury that made the air around her feel charged. "Desmond has already leaked your name to 2 outlets. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he is not going to stop at your badge. Where are we going? Somewhere he can't reach you. Her jaw was tight enough to ache. My penthouse. I know what that looks like. I don't particularly care right now. The storm that broke over the city that night felt less like weather than confirmation, thunder rolling in low over glass towers, while Larkin's penthouse held its light steady through floor to ceiling windows 40 floors up. Griggs stationed 2 men at the elevator. Larkin poured 2 glasses of something dark and didn't drink hers, just turned it slowly by the stem, watching me the way you watch someone you're afraid might shatter if you look away. He's going to say I seduced my way into a promotion, I said, staring at my own hands. He's going to say I've been engineering this since the wallet. And people are going to believe it, because it's easier to believe an Omega schemed her way up than that she was simply good at her job. Then we make it impossible to believe, Larkin said. I have never lost a fight I was willing to burn my own reputation to win. I am entirely willing. The lights went out on all 60 floors at once. Storm flickered, plunging the penthouse into a dark broken only by lightning and the low emergency glow along the baseboards. Larkin's hand found mine in the dark, without hesitation. Sure of where I was, the way you're only sure of things you've thought about for a very long time. Wren, my name again, the way she'd said it at my door, except sober this time, deliberate. Tell me to stop. And I will. I need you to know that before anything else happens tonight. My heart was doing something violent and unfamiliar in my chest. I don't want you to stop. Say it plainly. I won't move on anything less. Don't stop, I said, and the words felt like the truest thing I'd said all week. She kissed me then, careful at first, like she was still asking a question with her mouth instead of her words, and I answered it the only way I had left, by not pulling away, by leaning into black fur and struck flint gone warm as embers, by letting 4 days of fear come undone in the dark of a room 40 floors above a city that had just tried to unmake me. When the lights flickered back on, we were still holding each other, and neither of us moved to explain it. The days that followed the blackout were the gentlest of my life, which felt like a strange thing to say about days spent hiding from a man trying to destroy me, but it was true. Larkin's penthouse, for all its cold glass and colder history, became something closer to a nest than a fortress, blankets migrating to the couch, my mother's chipped mug appearing one morning on Larkin's kitchen shelf, beside 3 matching, unchipped ones she'd apparently had made overnight, the whole set Robin's egg blue, handles unbroken. I noticed you only ever drink from the cracked one, she said, when I found them, embarrassed by how much the gesture undid me. I didn't want to replace it. I wanted it to have company. You remembered that. From one night, 3 months ago, my voice wasn't steady. I remember everything you've ever told me, she said, simply, like it wasn't the most devastating sentence anyone had ever said to me. The lemon shortbread. The fern on your sill. The fact that you hum when you're concentrating and stop the second you notice you're doing it. I have spent a year collecting you in pieces I had no right to collect. Now I intend to spend considerably longer earning the right properly. It was in that stretch of days that the scars came out, one at a time, offered rather than extracted. Larkin told me about her mother, Vivienne, who had run this company with a warmth nobody believed possible of the Thorn name, and who had died of an illness her husband refused to let interrupt a shareholder meeting. He gave the presentation the morning after, Larkin said, staring at nothing. I sat in the front row because he told me absence would be read as weakness. I have spent every year since trying to prove I inherited his spine instead of her heart. I am only now starting to suspect I got both, and hated myself for the wrong one. I told her about the clinic office at 19, about Callum's jacket folded over his arm, about learning to be so good at my job that no one had time to notice I was quiet. He wasn't wrong that I'm quiet, I said. He was wrong that it made me less. You were never less, Larkin said, low, fierce. You were the only person in a year who has ever made me feel like being needed wasn't a leash. It felt like being handed something I didn't know I was allowed to want. She attempted, one evening, to cook, an act of domestic ambition undone within 11 minutes by a stove she had clearly never operated in her life, smoke curling off a pan while the coldest woman in the city stood over it, looking genuinely, hilariously affronted. As though the eggs had personally betrayed her business acumen. I run a fleet of 400 vessels, she said, scraping char into the sink with the wounded dignity of a general surveying a lost battle. I cannot be defeated by breakfast. You absolutely can, I said, laughing for the first time in days, and she looked at me like the sound itself was worth the burnt eggs. The warmth lasted until Griggs's phone rang at 11 that night, and his face, when he answered, told us the storm hadn't passed. It had only been gathering somewhere out of sight. The photographs hit 3 outlets by morning, grainy, long lens, taken from a building across from Larkin's penthouse, time-stamped the night of the blackout. Desmond's people had done their work well. The story that ran beside them wasn't about romance, it was about corruption. An Omega clerk facing embezzlement charges, suddenly sharing a bed with the CEO whose company she'd allegedly been robbing. Buying her silence, one headline said. Or being bought. By noon the board had called an emergency session, and, by 2, Griggs found me in the penthouse kitchen with a face that told me before his words did. They're threatening a vote of no confidence, he said. Desmond's convinced 3 board members it's a liability issue. They want a statement distancing her from you. Today, Larkin's press conference was scheduled for 4 o'clock, and I watched it from a car outside the building because Griggs wouldn't let me any closer, my hands wrapped around nothing, my stomach a stone. She stood at the podium in the coldest posture I'd ever seen her wear, every soft edge from the last 4 days folded away, like it had never existed. Miss Voss is the subject of an internal investigation, she said, voice flat, precise, giving nothing. Any personal association implied by these photographs is a private matter that will not factor into the company's handling of the allegations against her. It wasn't a denial. It was, if I'd known to listen for it, the careful language of a woman refusing to lie under oath while giving her enemies nothing to seize. I didn't know to listen for it. I only heard her call 4 days of my life a private matter, heard the crowd's murmur shift from scandal to satisfaction, and felt something in my chest cave in like a floor giving way beneath a weight it was never built to hold. I got out of the car. I don't remember deciding to. I remember rain, again, because the city seemed determined to weep on every worst night of my life. And I remember Callum, of all people, materializing at the edge of the crowd with an expression of vindicated pity that made my skin crawl. I did try to tell you, he said, not unkindly, which was somehow the cruelest part. Women like her don't keep women like you. You're, he gestured, vaguely, at all of me, quiet. She needed someone loud enough for the cameras to love. I'm sorry, Ren, I really am. Silent Omega. The old wound, torn open in the rain outside a building where I'd just watched the woman I loved erase me in 6 sentences for the cameras, and I stood there shaking, unable to find a single word loud enough to answer either of them. I didn't go back to the penthouse. I went home, to my own small apartment above the shuttered laundromat, and sat on my floor with my mother's chipped mug in my hands, and let myself, finally, fully break. Nadia Okafor showed up at my door at 7 the next morning, with coffee she knew I wouldn't drink, and a look on her face that said she'd already heard everything. I've worked in that basement 6 years watching men like Desmond get away with things because nobody bothered checking the math, she said, dropping her bag on my counter like a declaration of war. You checked the math. Let's check it harder. We worked through the night, spreading 3 years of shipping manifests across my kitchen table, cross-referencing signatory approvals against a vendor account that, the deeper we dug, connected not just to the $400,000 Desmond had tried to pin on me, but to $11 million moved across 6 years, laundered through Shell Logistics contracts with names generic enough to vanish into the noise of an ordinary ledger. At 2 a.m, exactly the hour Larkin had first knocked on my door, I found the final piece. A security override logged the same week my wallet return had been traced, used to erase the footage of Desmond accessing my terminal directly. He hadn't just embezzled, he'd engineered my badge number into the frame the moment he learned Larkin had started watching me, because a scandal about her private life was a far better shield than an audit of his. Griggs arrived at dawn, grim, apologetic, carrying news I hadn't asked for and needed anyway. The press conference was staged, he said. Miss Thorn and I planned it together. Vague language, deliberately. It was meant to give Desmond nothing to escalate, draw him into overreaching while we finished the audit. She didn't expect you to hear it as a denial. She's been awake 3 days straight trying to fix what it cost you. That doesn't undo what it felt like, I said, and my voice cracked, but for the first time in days, it wasn't only grief in it. It was resolve. No, Griggs agreed. But this might. He set a folder on my table, internal transfer logs he shouldn't have had access to, evidence he'd apparently been quietly gathering since the night he first found Larkin asleep past dawn in a stranger's apartment, and decided, on his own authority, that whoever put that look on his employer's face was worth protecting. Desmond's moving the last of the funds tonight. If we don't stop him now, he disappears with $11 million and your name stays ruined behind him. We went to Thorn Tower at midnight, Nadia and Griggs and I, evidence in hand, and found Desmond in his office exactly as the transfer logs predicted, mid-transaction, his composure cracking the moment he saw the folder in my hands. You don't understand what you're holding, he said, and for the first time his voice had lost its silk. That money keeps a great many arrangements quiet, arrangements that go considerably higher than me. Then you should have thought about that before you put my badge number on the door you left open, I said, and my voice, this time, did not shake at all. He lunged for the folder, not for the papers so much as for me, and I don't fully remember the next several seconds except that Larkin was suddenly there, having arrived through a door I hadn't heard open, putting herself bodily between his outstretched hand and my chest, taking the shove meant for me across her own shoulder hard enough that she staggered into the desk. Griggs had him restrained within 4 seconds. Desmond's confession, once security had him cornered and the numbers laid out with nowhere left to hide, came in a furious unbroken stream. The shell accounts, the years of skimming, the deliberate framing of an Omega clerk, because nobody checks the math on the quiet ones, that's the whole point of hiring them, and I watched something in Larkin's face go dangerously, coldly still as she listened to him say it. I want him gone, she said, low, to Griggs, in a voice I'd never heard her use. Not fired, gone. I want every door this city has ever opened for him closed by morning. Larkin, I put my hand on her arm, and she turned to me like the touch had physically stopped her mid-stride towards something she couldn't take back. Let the law take him, not you. You told me once your father taught you that control mistaken for cruelty was strength. Don't prove him right tonight. She looked at me for a long moment, chest still heaving, and then, slowly, the coldness in her eased, not gone but redirected, banked like a fire pulled back from a door it had been about to burn down. "You're right," she said. "Quiet. I don't want to be the kind of alpha who needs to destroy someone to feel like I've won." The police arrived within the hour. Desmond Castellan was arrested on 11 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and evidence tampering. $11 million traced across 6 years laid out in evidence bags that would, within a month, become the centerpiece of a trial that made every outlet that had run his lies about me publish a retraction on their front page instead. The emergency shareholder meeting convened 4 days later in the same boardroom where Desmond had once told a room of executives that my badge number was evidence of my guilt. This time, the room was fuller, press cameras lining the back wall, and Larkin stood at the podium not with the flat, careful language of the last press conference, but with her spine straight and her voice. For the first time in public, unguarded, 6 days ago, she said, "You watched me decline to defend Miss Voss by name, and you read it as confirmation of the lies being told about her. That was a tactical failure on my part, and I own it fully. What I did not decline, then or ever, was to love her." The room went very still. Ren Voss uncovered $11 million in fraud that senior executives with a great deal more institutional trust than her failed to catch for 6 years, using nothing but the same forensic diligence this company undervalued in its own basement for 4. She was framed, publicly humiliated, and stripped of a career she built without a single privilege I was born into. And she still handed this board the evidence that saved it. I am not interested in a company that cannot see what was standing in its own hallways the entire time. Somewhere near the back, Callum, who had apparently come hoping to witness one more humiliation, found himself instead the subject of a very different kind of attention when a reporter, connecting names from Desmond's trial documents, asked loudly whether it was true he'd known about the fraud allegations and repeated them publicly before any verdict, and watched his face do the particular collapsing thing faces do when a lifetime's cruelty finally arrives back at its own door. Larkin found me afterward in the same observation room where she'd first told me about the wallet. City spread out below us gone gold with early evening light. "I owe you 6 days I can't get back," she said. "I intend to spend considerably more than 6 making up for them. You already are," I said, and meant it. She reached for my hand, turned it over, pressed something warm into my palm, a small vial, cut glass, the scent unmistakably hers even before I opened it. "Bond glands respond to proximity," she said, low, careful. "I've wanted to ask you something for 4 days, and kept stopping myself because I never wanted you to feel claimed before you felt chosen. So I'm asking now, plainly, the way you asked me to, that first night. Tell me to stop, and I will never bring it up again." "Ask me properly," I said, my heart loud enough I was certain she could hear it, with the actual words, "Ren Voss." Her hand found the curve of my neck, gentle, deliberate, thumb resting just above the gland that had never, in 27 years, surged for anyone. "May I mark you? Now, tonight, and for as long as you'll have me after." "Yes," I said, no hesitation left in me at all. "Yes, don't stop." The bite, when it came, was gentle enough to ask forgiveness, and sure enough to need none, and the bond that opened between us in that instant felt less like a chain than a door finally, fully unlocked. Her grief and her cold, careful love pouring into me as clearly as mine poured into her, and for the first time in my life, my quiet did not feel like something the world had to work around. It felt like the frequency she'd been listening for the entire time. Desmond Castellan was sentenced 11 weeks later to 19 years, the maximum his crimes allowed, and I sat in the gallery with Larkin's hand in mine and watched the man who'd tried to erase me let out in handcuffs past a room full of the same executives who'd once laughed along with him. Callum's firm, it turned out, had quietly dissolved 3 of its largest contracts the same month his public comments about the fraud trial went viral for the wrong reasons. The last I heard of him, he was selling insurance 2 states over, a fact Nadia delivered to me with the smug satisfaction of a woman who had waited a long time for justice to be this specific. Griggs got a promotion he pretended not to want and a hand-knit scarf from Mrs. Aldis, Larkin's housekeeper, who had taken to leaving fresh chamomile in my old office desk the week I officially transferred to head Thorn Maritime's new Forensic Compliance Division, a title Larkin created. She told me with a completely straight face. Purely so she'd have a professional reason to visit my floor twice a day. 6 months after the trial, on a morning with the particular gold light that only comes early and only briefly, Larkin knelt on the observation floor, where she'd once told me the truth about a wallet, and opened a small box with a ring inside it. Simple, unshowy, chosen, she said, specifically because it wouldn't outshine my hands while I worked. I have spent a year learning that needing you was never a leash, she said, voice steady even as her hands weren't. It was the first thing I've ever wanted that made me feel more like myself instead of less. Marry me, Ren, bond me properly, in front of everyone who ever doubted either of us. Yes, I said, and this time there was nothing quiet about it at all. The ceremony was small, in Larkin's mother's old rose garden, restored for the occasion after years of neglect Larkin admitted she'd never had the heart to fix alone. Nadia stood beside me, looking fierce and proud. Griggs cried, unashamedly, in a way that undid his whole gruff reputation in front of half the board. In 15 years, he told the small gathering, raising his glass, I never once saw her wait for anyone. I've watched her wait 4 years for this woman without knowing it, and 6 months chasing her properly once she did. If that's not proof enough of what she found, I don't know what is. Our vows were short. I heard you the first time, Larkin said, echoing, deliberately, the old cruel phrase that had followed me since I was 19, turning it inside out until it meant something entirely different. I've never stopped listening since. You can fall apart here, I told her, the words I'd given her that first night, given back now as a promise instead of an offering. I've got steady hands. I intend to keep them for the rest of our lives. A year on, our kitchen holds 4 mugs, Robin's egg blue, one of them still chipped, still the one I reach for first every morning out of habit neither of us has ever wanted to break. Larkin has gotten marginally better at eggs. Thorn Maritime's Forensic Compliance Division has caught 2 smaller frauds since Desmond, both times because someone quiet noticed a number that didn't belong. And both times, this time someone listened. Some mornings I still catch myself waiting to be unseen, an old reflex built over too many years to unlearn all at once. Then I look up, and she is already looking back, the way she has every morning since a rainy 2 a.m. When she stood on my doorstep and said my name like it was the only word she trusted herself with. Being unseen for long enough teaches you to whisper. Being loved properly teaches you to speak again, one steady word at a time. I spent half my life staying quiet so no one would notice how much I needed. She noticed anyway and built a life loud enough, finally, to hold both of us. The end.